Ladies and gents, today is all about something different. Now, this beautiful idyllic lake, it's really local to my Leicestershire home. It's part of a local club, and this lake is called Ashpole Spinner. The club's Green Hills, and this place is as far as you can get from a normal commercial fishery as possible. As you can see, it's a stunning place. The water is tap clear. You could probably drink the water, it's that clear. And the stocking, let's just say the stocking isn't like your standard commercial. We're not looking to catch mountains of fish today. We're looking to catch maybe a few tench, odd bream, roach, chub, sort of like natural water species. I'm not promising a bag up day. We could even blank. The lake hasn't been fishing that well, but it's just beautiful to sit here and fish in these sort of surroundings. This to me is what fishing's like. This is what I used to do as a kid. I used to try and sneak in on farm ponds and little lakes around the countryside and try and nick a day's fishing everywhere. I've had a really good plumb around. I'm itching to get going, and I've found one little tiny area. It's probably the size of a dustbin lid that's weed free. There's loads of weed in this lake, obviously because it's so clear and the stocking isn't massive. The weed has just obviously shot up, and what I'm really keen to do is to get some bait in. So before I talk about rigs, before I talk about the approach, I'll show you what bait I've got. I've got with me on this side, I've got with some casters, some beautiful casters. They are for loose feeding over the top. It's something I don't want to do because that area that I'm targeting is so tight. So my bait that I want to concentrate on is all on my right hand side, because as you know, I'm a little bit caggy handed and I'm a bit all over the place. My potting in bait, it all goes on the right hand side. Ground bait, I'm going to be feeding my bait in little balls of ground bait. Get it to the bottom, I can pinpoint where it goes. Obviously that little area, that dustbin lid area of weed free water, I know that my ground bait's sinking down bang in the centre of that. So ground bait for today, it's swim stim silverfish mix. I've gone for the betaine green. It's a fish meal based mix, but it's still really sweet, and I think it's going to appeal to, like I say, those species we're targeting today: bream, tench, roach, even the odd chub. I think there's some ide in here as well, some perch, maybe an odd carp. Whenever that float goes under, we don't know what we're going to hook. So I've mixed that ground bait. I've not mixed it overly wet. Just goes together nicely in a ball, and then it'll break down. And I've riddled it, obviously to get any lumps out, but mainly to just distribute the water throughout the mix. And then the other bait that we've got are these beauties, worms. Now, I think on these sort of lakes, worms are really attracted to fish. It's a natural bait, they're used to seeing them. I'm not too sure this lake sees a lot of baits like pellets and meat and things like that. I think natural baits are going to score today. So what I want to do is chop a few worms up. I'm going to mix those worms into the ground bait, and I'm going to use the ground bait as a carrier for these worms. I want a really fine chop worm, so sort of like 1/4 inch bits I think is about right. Not chopping up loads because I don't envisage feeding loads of bait. Hopefully you can see that there. And I can always re-chop. I always think a fresh chop's really good. Obviously you don't want chopped worms going off on your side tray. Although we're in autumn now, the sun's still out and we still could have bait drying out on the tray. So a fresh chop is always good. We'll probably do that later on in the session. So I've chopped those worms up, and what I've done is I've fluffed it through the ground bait. So all I've done is put them in there, and I've just sort of like fluffed it in a little pile in the middle of that ground bait. And what I can do now is make a little ball. Don't want to feed loads of bait, just want to feed like a golf ball of bait to start with. Remember, that area we're targeting isn't very big, so we don't really want to feed loads of bait that's going to scatter all over the place. I'm going to feed a golf ball of bait. I'm going to squeeze it reasonably hard, and you can see there it's packed with worm. That's all I'm feeding to start with, worm and ground bait. we're going to plop that in with a pole cup. Obviously everything's cut back to the same length, so the pole cup's exactly the same length as my top kit, so I know I'm bang on the spot. Now unfortunately, the clear spot I found was at 16 metres. I plumbed up everywhere in this swim, even under the trees, because I thought a bit of shade might stop the weed growing. And I plumbed up everywhere, dragged weed out from all over the place, and we've got to 16 metres and there's a little spot that's clear. So I'm going to really take my time to plop that little ball in. And there we go, a little worm bomb has gone in. And I want to let that settle. So what I want to do is just talk to you about the rig I'm using and why I'm using certain components, because I've done a couple of things that I think are very specific to this venue and they could help me out as the day goes on. So we'll start with the float. The float is Malman Dusty. It is a float that I use loads on natural venues. It's got a 1.5mm bristle, hollow bristle. It's got a bendy wire stem. It's classic sort of like slim rugby ball shape. I think it's perfect sort of still water float, that is, for small to medium baits. We've got that on 016 main line. That's low vis main line. I've got a bulk 2 foot from the hook. Remember, the water here is pretty clear, so if I can maybe get a slower fall of my hook bait in that last 2 feet, I think it might help us catch an odd fish. So got a bulk of number 9s, 2 number 9 slot shotters, droppers, and then I've got an 8-inch hook length. I'm laying probably 3 inches of line on the bottom, so there's no point me using a really short hook length. An 8-inch hook length, there's enough line there for obviously the shot not to be right in the fish's eye when he takes the bait, and also because I'm using bigger baits, I'm going to be using worms as hook bait. The fish grab onto worms. They sort of like eat them, move off. They don't suck and blow them like they would a pellet or a particle bait. They sort of grab onto them. So bite detection shouldn't be a problem. Hook length is 014 and I've got a size 16 hook on. Obviously a barbless hook for the fishery rules. Now, elastic wise, yellow Reacticore would be my choice for this style of fishing. I've been told that the fishing here are sort of like 2 to 4 pound average. Like I say, if we catch a tench, it's going to give us a bit of a fight. It's very weedy. So what I've done is I've stripped out, I think I've still got it here, there we go. I've stripped out a good 3 feet of elastic out of the pole, and I've replaced it with braid. So I've got some 020 braid, I've looped it, and I've ran that through the puller bung. And that means I can still set the elastic nice and soft at the top end, so when I do hook a smaller fish, hopefully some's going to come out, but the elastic's going to bottom out a lot quicker. It's going to power up really quick. And if I do hook a tench, I can hopefully stand up, maximum pressure on the pole, and I can hopefully lift it away from the bottom. It's easier said than done. Obviously, we all know how doggy tench are when you hook them, so we're hoping for the best there. But I'm trying to stack the odds in my favour. You might also notice that I've gone for, at least to start with, a really long line between pole tip and float. The water's really clear. I can't tell you how clear the water is. And I'm just thinking, I'm not going to be in and out all the time, getting lots of bites. If I can get my float to sit there and then move my pole to the side and keep as much pole away from my float as possible, it's got to help. Now, if this wind gets up, I might have to shorten this line down because I don't want the float to be drifting all over the place. But, like I say, if I can hold that float there over that spot with that long length of line and my pole tip away from my float, that's got to be worth a few extra fish. What I'm going to do is have a quick tidy up with the gear around me, let that bait settle for another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have a drop in, maybe with a couple of bits of worm on the hook. So folks, here we go. First drop in. Like I say, there's a massive chance we could blank. This lake hasn't been fishing particularly well at all, but it is a beautiful place to sit. And I'm always optimistic whenever I sit down, so hopefully there's a nice fish waiting for us. I'm going to start off with one of my favourite tench baits. That is two worms. Nip the heads off them so they wriggle like mad. Bit of juice comes out. I think that's a perfect bait. Two little dendrobina worms. What I'm going to do is I've lined up everything with a far bank marker. I'm going to try and drop my rig in, bang over where we've put that little ball of ground bait, and hopefully there's a fish there waiting for us. Like I say, this lake is chock-a-block with weed. There seems to be weed everywhere. And if I get my pole slightly to the side, we can maybe keep everything away from the float. Now at least I think we're fishing. Is that a bite straight away? There we go, bite straight away, we've got a fish. It's not what we're expecting, but we've got a fish. Little perch by the looks of it. Not the intended quarry, but nice start. Anyway, at least we've not blanked. I'm not too sure if there's any bigger perch in here. I know there's an odd pike in here. I think there's a bit of everything, to be honest, but not really heard of any monster perch. Same bait again. Don't really want to start loose feeding bait over the top if I can help it. I know that falling bait through the water, rattle on the surface, is obviously going to bring fish into the area, but I'm so wary that we've only got that little tiny area to fish over. And if we can start catapulting bait, we're going to be spreading fish all over the place. So it'd be great if we can just pop bait in and keep everything nice and tight, at least to start with. Right, so folks, it's time for a rethink. We've had some bites, but they're all from those little perch. Obviously, there's quite a few of those little fish in here. So what I want to do is refeed. I was hoping I wouldn't need to refeed until I've caught a decent fish. But, I'll say, because we've got a lot of those little perch in the swim, I want to make sure I've got some bait in the peg at all times. Now, this time, I've just made a little ball there. There's hardly any worm in this ball because I feel that the worm's just bringing those perch in. So I'm just going to try and rely mainly on the ground bait. Still probably a little bit of chop worm from when I originally mixed a little bit in for that initial feed. But I want to try and rely on the ground bait a little bit more. God, you could see the ground bait going down probably a foot and a half down then. Even at 16 metres I can see the ball of ground bait drifting down. So hopefully the perch won't be as attracted to that ground bait as they are the worms. I've put another shot on the float just to dot it down a little bit more because I want to fish a smaller bait. I want to just fish a worm head on the hook. I feel that obviously when I'm fishing those longer, more wriggly bits of worm. They're great for catching a fish, but I think the perch are really attracted to them, so they're homing in on them really quick. So what I'm going to do is fish a smaller bait, a bait that's a little bit, well, a lot more static, so we're not going to get as many indications from those little fish. That's the plan. And the reason I've put that extra shot on the float is just because I feel that we're going to have to cut down on the resistance to the fish when they take the bait. Because we're using a smaller bait, we need to cut down on the resistance to any fish that's taking the bait. So putting the rig in is exactly the same, holding it out until I know everything's pretty much straight. Then I can lower it down into that hole. And now we're sitting there, float's dotted down nicely. The fish takes that, it's a bite there. Same result, little perch. I'm hoping that these little perch get a little bit fed up, or we feed them off. Been in this situation before, and just all of a sudden your peg goes quiet. Either the perch have had too much to eat, or a bigger fish comes in the swim and clears the perch off. But I'm hoping by changing what we're doing, as in hook bait and feeding, we're just making things a little bit less attractive to those little nuisance fish. Let me tell you folks, we have just started to get a response. Got a fish on it, it's got me in the weed, I don't know what it is. I'm hoping it's a tench, but I haven't got a clue what it is. And we've had to change tack because we were just getting no response whatsoever. Literally nothing was happening. So we started loose feeding some bait. I'm hoping there's a fish still on. It's just a ball of weed at the minute, this. We started loose feeding some bait, and all of a sudden, there we go, there is a fish in there. We've just got a ball of weed. All of a sudden we started getting a response. I mean, we've sat there we've fished for an hour and a half, potting in bait. I was desperate not to feed any bait with the catapult. God, it's a beautiful fish. And all of a sudden started loose feeding some casters, and we've got a ball of weed. But in the middle of that ball of weed, we've got what we came for. Let me hold this up for you. I'll unhook him first, actually. This is what we came for. Look at this. There we go. Beautiful fish. He's maybe 4 pound. Stunning fish, hardly fought because he buried his head in the weed straight away. And obviously the weed got over his eyes. Might be a she, I'm not too sure on my tench. I think it's quite easy to tell the difference with tench. I think this is a he. The weed got over his eyes, and then it was easy going from there. We never said it was going to be an easy day. In fact, we knew it was going to be a tricky day, but it's fish like that make it worthwhile. So I'm going to put him in the net. There's fizzing going on the peg. The peg, since we started loose feeding, the peg is a totally different swim. So I'm hoping we can catch a couple more. If not, I'm happy just with that fish, but let's see if we can catch a couple more. What I want to do is, because I'm really keen that I don't want to spread my fish too much, I want to keep that activity in one area, I'm just going to cup in just a few casters. Like I say, it's not a heavily stocked fishery. You haven't got to feed loads of bait. So all I'm going to do is just cup in sort of like 20 or 30 casters, bang on the spot, and then I know that I'm fishing over some bait. And then when I loose feed, I feel like I'm attracting fish into the area, because I'm never going to be able to pinpoint those casters on top of my float at 16 metres as accurately as I want. So I'm going to just set a little base with the pot full of bait, well, 30 casters. Cool, I'm so pleased I caught that one. It was looking like we were really going to struggle. There we go, so 30 casters. It might have been 32, I didn't count them, but nice little palm full of casters goes on the spot. And then I'm going to bait up again. I caught that fish on double cast off, so obviously I'm feeding casters. So I wanted to sort of match the hatch with my bait. I'd have loved to have fished a single caster, but fishing quite a big hook because I feel like you've got to pull them away from the weed. So double caster just masks the hook a little bit. There is some little carp in this lake. I've just had a quick walk round because I was beginning to think there was literally nothing in here. And I've seen a couple of little carp just scoot out from the margin, so it gave me a little bit of hope. And when I came back, I got a couple of little indications, and I thought maybe they're from those little carp. But so pleased to have caught that fish. I don't know many venues you can go now and target tench. You actually catch a net full of tench, or even one or two. Doesn't seem like there's that many venues around now where you can do that. So double caster. Let's see if we can repeat the process. This is just unbelievable. We've just lowered that rig back in, and then obviously just carried on going. It's got to be another tench the way it's fighting. Just got to be. It's as if they've just turned up from nowhere. This is fantastic now. The session has gone from looking like a total non-starter to something brilliant. Look at that. Oh. proper old warrior tench. Weed all up the line. You can see all the weed being tore apart as I'm bringing the fish in. Hopefully you can see there why we've tightened that elastic up a little bit, because I was able to actually keep this fish just out of the worst of the weed. But there we go. Another superb tench. Beautiful fish. Probably not as big as the first, but gave me a bit more of a run around because he didn't weed me up. He didn't get in that solid weed. He made a right commotion in the swim. I'll be really surprised if there's any more knocking around after that, but we will have another go and see what we can do. Well folks, you talk about one last cast. I've lost number of the amount of last casts I've had, but unfortunately I've had to shoot off. I've got to get this idiot to football training, but I just could not catch that extra tench for you. Really disappointing, but I think I've hooked those fish. I've lost a couple as well. I've been beat up, I've got to be honest. I've been beat up by a couple of fish, and I've got to get back there and try again and put a few wrongs right. I've really enjoyed the session though. Really interesting little venue. That to me sums up what my fishing used to be when I was a kid. Turning up to a venue I know very little about and just having a day's fishing and just seeing what happens. And aren't tench brilliant? They come in your peg, the fizzing, the activity, and feeding those casters was just like flicking a switch. Brilliant session. I've really enjoyed it. More than happy with my 2 tench. I'm going to leave you with a lovely little shot of me returning the fish. Until next time guys, tight lines.